When we talk about carbon offsets, it sounds great, doesn't it? But there are some problems associated with carbon offsets that you should be aware of. Let's have a look at the top 7 problems with carbon offsets. The theory of net zero is quite easy. You start with emissions of this, you reduce them down as much as you possibly can, and then you offset what's left. Okay? Sounds fantastic, because in theory all you do is you buy offsets for that bit that's left, job done. But there are some problems with offsets. There are some significant problems with offsets. And I'd like to run through with you the top 7 issues that I've found with offsets in my experience of dealing with them. Okay? So number 1, and this is kind of the main problem, I think, really, there's no overall legislation with offsets. Okay, so, if you wanted to, you could buy some offsets off me that I completely make up. And we'll come on to, a couple of examples of that a bit later, but there's no governing body. So there's no official certification. There's no stamp saying, that's an offset there. There are in some markets, the carbon trading markets for emissions. They're certainly going on in Canada, the UK perhaps a bit, but it's starting to gain traction. It's starting to firm up. But there's a lot of stuff out there that could do with a bit more sort of legislation and tightening up, really. So number 1, there's no central agency that issues chunk, that's an offset. Okay. Number 2 is corruption. Okay, so there's lots of money in offsets. There's certainly hundreds of millions flowing around, could even be billions these days. There's money to be made, and corruption is out there. Okay, I've come across it a couple of times since the stuff at Anistic, since we've been doing all this. And you just got to watch out for it, really. The corruption basically is people selling fictitious offsets. We're going to be planting 200 acres of trees. Do you want to buy a slice of that? And either A, they don't exist in the first place. For example, the entire forest is just purely fictitious. Or secondly, they sell the same things over and over again. So, imagine that you've got this 200-acre forest, and you say, right, well, here's an acre, do you want to buy that to offset your carbon emissions? Well, do you know what? They might sell that once, sell it again, sell it again, sell it again. So, they shouldn't do that. They should be tight on this, and there are systems out there to sort of help get around this, which I'll tell you at the end, but just watch out for corruption, okay? Number 3, profiteering. Profiteering could be, for example, the case that I saw is, someone was paid money not to cut a woodland down. Okay, so someone came to them and said, they went to an agency and said, we're going to cut the wood down on our sort of estate, and if you pay me X, we won't cut it down. Therefore, we'll be offsetting the carbon emissions that we would have caused, which is a strange concept in the first place. If you dig a bit deeper into it, there was no way they were going to cut the woods down. It was on a wealthy person's estate. It was a nice looking wood. They weren't going to touch it, but they got paid, every year for not cutting the wood down. So this profiteering aspect is out there as well, and you have to watch out for that. Okay. Number 4 is poor design. Okay, so the offsets are completely valid. There is a reason to offset. There's a system out there. They're all numbered and they're all sort of signed off and authorized, etc. But the system is poorly designed in the first place. And the classic example of this are when you pay someone to offset by planting trees, and all they do is they end up with this kind of monoculture. So they're all, is it spruce or pine or something like that? But they're all Douglas fir, whatever it's going to be, they're all the same tree because it's dead easy to plant those, laid out in a grid. The forest is dead, and if you're bored, have a look on YouTube about, there's a guy who's done a video with a vibrant, sort of forest made up of different components, and then one of these new forests that have been created, which is just dead as a dodo. Okay, so poor design is another problem that you need to sort of think about with offsets. The 5th problem is the international aspect of offsets. So when you're buying offsets, and as I say, there's some tips at the end of this, but I've seen some really dodgy offsets come in from overseas, and in one, no names, no pack drill, but one of them, they were certainly very cheap offsets. They were so cheap, they were significantly below the sort of market price of what you should be paying to offset a ton of carbon, but they were to do with the dam creation. So they were getting sort of, you know, offsets because you were contributing towards the cost of a dam being built. And do you know what? They would have built the dam anyway, you know, with or without your donation. And that's the sixth problem, and we call it additionality in the trade. Additionality meaning that you know, the idea of offsets is you invest something and that causes a negative effect of carbon. It causes some carbon to be locked up. Let's take, for example, a school where they say, right, we want to put in some solar panels to replace our old oil burning sort of furnace, and, you know, put a heat pump in there instead. So you've got the, you know, solar panels and the heat pump, which is a magic combination, a really good combination, okay? And you say, well, you know, your donation makes that happen. So you say, right, okay, £50,000, whatever it's going to be, to actually make that project happen. But do you know what? They would have done it anyway. That's the additionality thing, is that, you know, your donation, neither here nor there. They were going to do it anyway. All they've done now is just saved 50 grand, really. So you have to look at the additionality aspect. Was whatever it is you're talking about going to be done anyway, regardless of your, you know, sort of donation? And that really is probably my point with the dam that I saw with people selling offsets for that. You know, they were going to build the dam with or without your sort of 20 grand, 30 grand, whatever it's going to be. So watch out for that. Last one, number 7, the other problem I've seen with offsets is that you should use offsets to eliminate the rump of carbon left after you reduce your emissions. You can't just buy offsets and use that to say, hey, we're now carbon neutral, and because, you know, we've written a check. It doesn't work like that. You have to do some carbon reduction projects. You have to have a decent plan thought through to get from here to here. You can't just write a check for offsets, and I've seen a number of companies do that, and it does annoy me. Okay, so you need to first reduce, then offset, not just offset. Okay, so there are 7 issues that you know, are out there. They're in the trade. How do you get around them? Okay, you've got to look at where you're buying the offsets from. Okay, who's selling them to you? Make sure the person selling, you trust the person you're selling the, you know, there's lots of companies out there, you know, and if you're buying them from, you know, Mary's Offsets Limited that was set up last year from a small office in such and such, you know, just be a bit careful. So look at who's actually selling them. Then look at the standard that they're accredited to. And if you get the good ones from a good vendor, they are typically okay. Okay, but look for the gold standard. That's the one that we rely on. And if the offsets have got the gold standard from a reputable dealer, they're probably okay. Okay, now look, last thing, top tip for you. If you want to get the most out of your investment in offsets, and, you know, significant investment for most people, it's a lot of money, you can think about doing 2 things. Ask your staff to get involved in choosing them, because the imagery that goes around these offsets is often very powerful. You know, it's lots of sunny scenes with, you know, forests being put up and people working in the fields, maybe in rural Africa, that kind of thing. It's all very emotive stuff. And what we recommend our clients do is they choose 3 schemes. It could be, for example, a national scheme, an international scheme, and a very local scheme. Okay, choose 3 and then put it out to your staff and ask them to vote on which one, you know, they should fund, or what proportion the funding should be split between them. And by doing that, you can start involving more people, and the more people involved in any net zero journey, the easier it is and the more buy-in you get. Okay, you can then, when you've done all the offsetting, these are great images to use in your carbon reduction plan. So when you've got your net zero plan, when you're looking at that at the end, you know, these images kind of bring it to life and just make you realize that's why we're doing it. Reduce carbon down and then pay for good work of, you know, lots of hardworking people out there to actually, you know, go and offset the remaining emissions that you're putting into the atmosphere. So there you go. Offsets in a nutshell. You know, number 1, there are some problems. Be aware of them. Number 2, buy from a reputable source. Number 3, look at the gold standard, you know, as a sort of seal of approval, and get your staff involved. If you want any more information, have a look in my book, Net Zero for Business, a real sort of practical guide on, you know, sort of how you can reduce your carbon down. And if you go onto our platform, anistic.earth, then, you know, there's a variety of different pre-approved offsets on there that you'll be safe buying. You know, we know they're all okay, we've vetted them. Okay, I hope that was useful, and I will see you next time.